Nobody knew who she was, until a single shot silenced them all. This story begins on a quiet Saturday morning at Fort Braxton Military Base in North Carolina. The civilian shooting range was, as usual, busy for the weekend. Among those present was Sarah Mitchell, a 28-year-old trauma nurse from Charlotte General Hospital. She wore simple athletic clothes, her chestnut hair pulled back into a practical ponytail. To everyone around her, she looked like an ordinary civilian trying out shooting for the first time. The range was full that day, mostly with active duty soldiers and retired veterans who treated the place like a second home. Staff Sergeant Mike Rodriguez was there with his buddies from the 82nd Airborne Division. Lieutenant Brad Thompson was practicing with his service weapon. Master Sergeant Frank Williams had driven down from Fort Liberty to teach his son the basics of shooting. Sarah approached the check-in counter, where Corporal Jenkins, a young soldier working a side job, greeted her with a friendly smile. "First time here, ma'am?" he asked. "Yes, that's right," Sarah answered quietly, her voice barely audible over the distant shots from the indoor lanes. Rodriguez overheard the exchange and laughed. "Well, you picked a good day to start. We've got some real shooters here today. Maybe you'll pick up a few things." Thompson agreed. "I'd start with .22 caliber. Much easier for beginners. The 9mm can be pretty intimidating for someone new." Williams walked over and adjusted his veteran's baseball cap. "Ma'am, I've been shooting for 25 years. My advice: start close, maybe 7 yards, and don't expect too much on day one. Shooting's harder than it looks in the movies." Sarah smiled politely. "Thank you for the advice, I really appreciate it." Jenkins handed her the safety waiver and range rules. "Just so you know, we require everyone to watch the safety video first. It's about 10 minutes and covers all the basics." "Of course," Sarah agreed, and sat down in the small viewing area. While Sarah watched the safety video, Rodriguez and his buddies continued their conversation nearby. "You know what I love about this place," said Rodriguez, loading his Glock 19. "You can always tell who's military and who's civilian here. Military folks have this posture, this grip, this confidence. Civilians, on the other hand, mostly flinch." Thompson laughed. "Remember that manager who came in last month, some tech company CEO? Thought he'd look like John Wick, but couldn't hit the broad side of a barn from 10 feet. Or that lawyer from Raleigh," Williams added, "who talked big about his gun collection and then nearly dropped his pistol from the recoil." Their conversation was interrupted when the safety video ended and Sarah stepped up to the counter to rent a firearm. "I'd like to rent a pistol, please." "What caliber were you thinking?" Jenkins asked. "We've got .22s, perfect for beginners, or if you're feeling bold, we've got 9mm. "I'll take the 9mm Glock 17, please," Sarah said without hesitation. Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. "Huh, respect. Jumping right into the deep end." Sarah completed her paperwork, bought her ammunition, and received her lane assignment. Lane 7, right between Rodriguez in Lane 6 and Thompson in Lane 8. Williams had taken Lane 9 with his son. As she walked to her lane with the rental case and ammunition, Thompson called out, "Hey, if you need any tips, just ask. We're all here to help." Sarah set up her lane methodically. She opened the case, took out the Glock 17, and began her inspection. Her movements were fluid but unremarkable, the kind of routine check any responsible shooter might perform. The range officer, Master Sergeant Davis, made his rounds. "Everybody clear on the range rules. Muzzle always downrange. Finger off the trigger except when firing. No rapid fire." "Understood, Sergeant," came the collective response from the service members. Sarah calmly loaded her magazine, 15 rounds of 9mm ammunition. She inserted the magazine with a decisive click and chambered a round. The first series began with targets at 10 yards. Rodriguez started strong, his shots grouping nicely in the 8 and 9 rings. Thompson was equally impressive, most of his shots hitting the central area. Williams, coaching his son, was also shooting well. Sarah raised her pistol for the first time. Her stance was different, not obviously military, but not obviously civilian either. She took her time, carefully aligning her sights. Her first shot echoed through the range. 10 ring, Davis called out, looking through the spotting scope, dead center. Rodriguez glanced over. "Nice shot, Beginner's luck happens. Sarah fired her second shot. Another perfect 10. Thompson took notice. 2 for 2 is pretty good shooting. Third shot, 10 ring. Fourth shot, 10 ring. Fifth shot, 10 ring. By now, shooting in the neighboring lanes had slowed considerably. Rodriguez lowered his pistol and stared through his scope at Sarah's target. What the hell? 5 shots, 5 perfect 10s. Thompson was equally stunned. That's not normal. That's not normal at all. Davis walked over to examine Sarah's target more closely. The 5 bullet holes were so tightly grouped they nearly formed a single, ragged hole. Ma'am, that's extraordinary shooting. Do you have formal training? Sarah paused, as if carefully weighing her words. I've had some instruction. Some instruction. Williams had joined the small crowd gathering at lane 7. Lady, that's not a little instruction. That's expert-level marksmanship. Davis made a decision. Ma'am, would you be interested in trying the 25-yard targets? I think you're ready for more of a challenge. Sarah nodded. I'd like that. The targets were moved to 25 yards, a distance that separated the good shooters from the great ones. Rodriguez and Thompson decided to shoot alongside her, curious how she'd handle the greater distance. Sarah took her position again. This time her preparation was even more deliberate. She adjusted her stance slightly, checked her sight alignment with extra care, and controlled her breathing with the precision of a yoga instructor. Her first shot at 25 yards rang out. Davis checked through the scope. 10 ring, dead center. The murmur of conversation on the range fell silent as shooters on other lanes began to notice what was happening at lane 7. Second shot, perfect 10. Third shot, perfect 10. By the fifth shot, Sarah had achieved something Davis had rarely seen in his 15 years managing the range, a perfect grouping at 25 yards with a service pistol. Rodriguez set his weapon down entirely. Okay, I give up. Who are you really? FBI, Secret Service. Thompson examined Sarah's target with a magnifying glass. These shots are so close together you could cover them with a coin. I've seen competitive shooters who can't do that. Williams approached Sarah directly. Ma'am, with all due respect, this level of shooting doesn't come from weekend classes at the local gun shop. This is professional marksmanship. Then something happened that changed everything. At that moment, the range door opened, and in walked a figure who made every service member on the range straighten up a little. Colonel Jack Morrison, 59 years old, the legendary shooting instructor who had trained more elite marksmen than anyone else in the Army. Though retired, he still consulted for various military installations and was a fixture at Fort Braxton. Morrison had a presence that commanded respect without a word. Silver hair, steel gray eyes, and the bearing of someone who had spent decades in service to his country. He noticed the crowd gathered around lane 7 and approached, curious. What's all the excitement about? Morrison asked Davis. Colonel, this civilian just shot 2 perfect groups, 10 yards and 25 yards, every shot centered. Morrison walked over to examine Sarah's targets. His expression grew more serious as he studied the tight groupings. This wasn't just good shooting. This was the kind of precision he'd only seen in his most elite students. Ma'am, Morrison said, turning directly to Sarah, may I ask your name? Sarah Mitchell, she answered, holding his gaze. Morrison's eyebrows drew together. The name seemed familiar, but he couldn't quite place it. Sarah Mitchell, Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell. Something shifted in Sarah's posture, a subtle change, but noticeable to someone with Morrison's experience. Yes, sir. Morrison's eyes widened as recognition set in. My God. Charlie Company, 3rd Battalion, Operation Desert Shield. The range fell completely silent. Rodriguez whispered to Thompson, who is she? Morrison looked at Sarah with a mix of pride and astonishment. Gentlemen, allow me to introduce Staff Sergeant Sarah Mitchell, formerly of the Army's elite sniper program, one of the finest shooters I ever had the privilege of training. And in that moment, the silence gave way to respect. The revelation hit the range like a thunderclap. Thompson's jaw dropped. Rodriguez actually took a step back. Williams removed his cap as a gesture of respect. Morrison continued, his voice carrying the weight of memory. Sarah completed my advanced sniper course 7 years ago. She finished the program with a 98% hit rate at distances up to 1,500 meters. Only 3 students in the history of my program ever reached that level of skill. But you're a nurse, Thompson said, still struggling to process the information. Sarah smiled gently. That's what I am now. After I left the army, I went to nursing school. I work in the trauma unit at Charlotte General. Morrison nodded approvingly. Sarah served 3 tours in Afghanistan. She was part of some of the most demanding missions in the region. Her confirmed count was, what was it, Sarah? 47 confirmed, Sarah said quietly, but I prefer not to dwell on those numbers. Rodriguez found his voice again. 47 confirmed kills. My God, you're a legend. I was a soldier, Sarah corrected gently. Now I'm a nurse. I prefer saving lives to taking them. Morrison's expression softened with paternal pride. Sarah represents the best our military produces. Not just technical skill, but character, integrity, the wisdom to know when to fight and when to heal. Williams stepped forward. Ma'am, I owe you an apology. We all do. We made assumptions. No apology necessary, Sarah interrupted. You had no way of knowing. And honestly, I prefer it that way. My past is my past. What matters is what I do now. Davis, still somewhat stunned, asked, would you be willing to demonstrate some long-range shooting? We have targets out to 300 yards. Sarah looked at Morrison, who nodded encouragingly. I think I'd like that. Morrison went to the rifle rack and selected a Remington 700 with a high-powered scope. This should feel familiar, he said, handing it to Sarah. The rifle seemed to transform in Sarah's hands. Any trace of the casual weekend shooter vanished. She handled the weapon with the familiarity of someone who had relied on such tools for her survival. 300 yards is a significant challenge, Morrison explained to the gathered crowd. Wind conditions, humidity, temperature, all of it affects the bullet's trajectory at that distance. Sarah spent several minutes examining the rifle, checking the scope's zero, and testing the trigger pull. She requested the ballistic data for the ammunition being used and ran mental calculations that impressed even Morrison. Conditions look stable, she murmured, more to herself than anyone else. The 300-yard target was set up. Sarah took her position at the designated long-range point. She dropped into a prone position with the fluid grace of someone who had done this thousands of times before, under far more stressful conditions. The range fell silent again. Even shooters on other lanes had stopped to watch. Sarah's preparation ritual was methodical and calming to observe. She made minor adjustments to her position, controlled her breathing, and began building her sight picture. For long moments she remained perfectly still, reading the wind conditions and making final calculations. Then she fired. Center hit zone, Davis announced through the scope, dead center. Spontaneous applause broke out across the range. One more, Morrison requested with a slight smile. Sarah loaded another round. This time she took less preparation time, having already established her zero and read the conditions. Her second shot was even more precise than the first. Touching the first hole, Davis called out, clear astonishment in his voice. Rodriguez shook his head in disbelief. I've been in the army for 12 years, and I've never seen shooting like that outside of special forces. And you're doing this with a rifle you've never fired, on a range you've never been to, Thompson added. Sarah stood and handed the rifle back to Morrison. Muscle memory, she said simply. Some things you never forget. Morrison took the rifle with ceremony. Sarah, you're still the best natural shooter I ever trained, but more importantly, you've become something even better, a healer. Thank you, Colonel. That means everything, coming from you. The crowd began to disperse, but not before each person spoke with Sarah individually. Rodriguez shook her hand firmly. Ma'am, it was an honor. Thank you for your service. Thompson echoed the sentiment. I'm sorry we underestimated you. You're incredible. Williams brought his son over. Danny, I want you to meet a real American hero. This is Staff Sergeant Mitchell. Sarah knelt down to the boy's eye level. Just call me Sarah. And remember, being a hero isn't about how well you can shoot. It's about using whatever skills you have to help other people. As the afternoon drew to a close, Sarah began packing up her gear. Morrison approached her one last time. Sarah, I have to ask, why don't you tell people about your past? You have every right to be proud of your service. Sarah considered the question thoughtfully. Because, Colonel, after I left the army, I learned something important. The most powerful thing about lethal skill is choosing not to use it. Every day I work at the hospital, I use everything the Army taught me: discipline, focus, working under pressure. But instead of taking lives, I save them." Morrison nodded with deep understanding. "That's why you were always my best student. True strength isn't about what you can destroy. It's about what you can build. You taught me that," Sarah said. "Maybe not directly, but you taught me that precision matters, that every shot has consequences, and that the greatest victory is the battle you don't have to fight." Davis approached with a range card. "Well, ma'am, I've documented today's results. It's going into our record books. Would you be willing to sign it?" Sarah took the card and the pen. Beneath her signature, she wrote, "In memory of those who cannot come home, and in honor of those who still can." As Sarah prepared to leave, the entire range felt different. The news had spread quickly, and even shooters who hadn't witnessed her demonstration came over to pay their respects. Rodriguez called out as she reached the door, "Sarah, one more question." She turned around. "With skills like yours, why nursing? You could have done anything." Sarah smiled, her hand on the door handle. "Because every trigger I don't pull is a life I could save instead. And that's the most accurate shot I can take." She stepped out into the North Carolina sunshine, leaving behind a range full of soldiers who would never forget the quiet nurse who reminded them that the greatest warriors are sometimes the ones who choose not to fight. Morrison watched her go, then turned to the assembled group. "Gentlemen, today you met someone special. Remember, the most dangerous people in the world are often the most peaceful. They understand the true cost of violence, and they choose mercy." Davis was still studying the target Sarah had shot. "Colonel, in all your years as a sniper instructor, how many could shoot like that?" Morrison thought for a moment. Maybe a dozen. But Sarah was different from the others. She never shot to prove she could. She shot because she had to. And when she no longer had to, she stopped. That's the mark of a true professional. The range slowly returned to normal activity, but the story of the nurse who silenced the range with a single shot would be told and retold for years to come. It became part of the folklore of Fort Braxton, a reminder that heroes walk among us every day, often unrecognized, always humble. Back at Charlotte General Hospital, Sarah Mitchell returned to her shift in the trauma unit on Monday morning. Her colleagues had no idea that their calm, competent teammate had just reminded a range full of soldiers what true expertise looks like. But Sarah preferred it that way. She had learned that the greatest power often lies in choosing not to use it, and that the most meaningful victories are won with compassion rather than ammunition. And every life she saved in that trauma unit was a testament to the lesson she'd learned in the military, that the most important target is the one you choose not to fight.